Formula One is looking into implementing new rules in the sport, with the majority of them revolving around the sprint races, as well as expanding the calendar. Obviously, the ever-growing nature of the sport is pushing the organisers of racing events to be more creative and to add more to the spectacle and the show of the sport, which is not what the drivers are fond of. Be that as it may, now we're looking at a situation in which the number of sprint races could be increased, the reversed grids are being more seriously considered, and the calendar could be expanding to more than 25 races from 2026 onwards. With all this in mind, will all these changes help the sport, or will they make it even less entertaining to watch? It's safe to say that the new changes that have been discussed by Stefano Domenicali will meet a lot of resilience among the fans, but I know for a fact that the drivers won't be very happy with them either, especially Verstappen. The three-time world champion, while praising the efforts of separating the sprint race from Parc Fermé, has been categorical when it comes to increasing the number of sprint races in the future. There is absolutely no need for it. But Domenicali is now pushing towards an agenda that could see a total of 8 sprint races in the calendar, which would be an increase of 2 from what we have right now. Points-wise, that is 16 more to be grabbed, and when you have such close competition up front, you can understand how much potential this change has in terms of changing the narrative and the pecking order of the grid. Elaborating on this change, Domenicali said, "I think that the change we've introduced this year is the right one for many reasons, with separate qualifying and Parc Fermé. The flow is much better today. I think that we are not in a position to say that we are going to be like MotoGP, for example, with a full race calendar situation of sprints, but there is a margin to grow, maybe for 1/3 of the calendar. That could be a possibility." But what is a huge question mark over this is not the addition of 2 more sprint races on the grid. After all, we have a massive contingent of new fans that arrived from the show Drive to Survive, and they are pretty much hooked to the drama and fighting aspects of this sport rather than just pure old school hardcore racing. And what the audience wants, the audience should get. The question mark is now around the reversed grids, as Domenicali has opened up about this as well, and it seems like we might be looking into something that is regularly implemented in Formula 2 during their own sprint events. It's quite questionable to add a rule like this in a highly competitive sport like Formula 1, because when you think about it, the overtaking is now much harder, and the faster driver on Friday will have to be punished by being demoted to P10 or P8 and having to climb his way in order to gain a couple more points in the sprint race. On the other hand, you will have a driver who will finish P10 in the qualifying session, then be promoted to P1, and if nothing too crazy happens to his 100-kilometer race, he'll be bagging 10 points from the sprint race, or 8 depending on the number of drivers who will score points from this event, which is equal to a P6 finish in the regular race. Imagine how much this will mean to drivers from lower bracket teams, or ones who are struggling to finish P10 on a regular Sunday, which is something that Hamilton also mentioned not that long ago, stating that while he is in huge favour of the reverse grids, he knows that a lot of drivers will go slow deliberately just so they could start the sprint event first. Adding further to this, Hamilton said, "Saturday is not the greatest of days, but I like the single practice session straight into qualifying. I think we can learn, and I love that we do have a different format rather than just the same 3 practice sessions and the race. The best sprint race I ever had was when I started last in 2021 in Brazil, so I'm in favour of the reverse order, except if we had that, then everyone will just try and qualify last." Of course, this was before the sprint event and the Parc Fermé was separated from each other, but nevertheless, Domenicali seems to be in huge favour of this rule, as he went on to elaborate more. The F1 boss believes that there won't be any dirty tactics used by the teams, because if they are to follow the pattern that is currently present in Formula 2, if the driver finishes 10th on Friday, then he will start 10th on Sunday, which will compromise his race a lot more than he could think of. So risking a potential bad race just for a sprint race win might not be on the cards for the fastest driver drivers on the grid. However, as I mentioned earlier, it would make a lot of sense for the drivers who are in the midfield or battling for scrap points. And when talking about the reversed grid to a greater extent, Dominicali said, "Personally, I would say, why not the reversed grids? It is a lot of action. It is overtaking. You're fighting for points. Some people can say, oh, it's a fake way of racing. Fake? There is nothing fake related to what you believe is the right format to produce great action. So I would be interested in discussing that again." Be that as it may, the changes are now also focused on the calendar too, because from what Dominicali has been talking about, it seems like we are very close to racing in Africa, with the last time that the F1 caravan visited this country being 1993. Hamilton has expressed his wishes of racing on this continent before he retires, but nevertheless, there are certain expenses that come along with what the sport is now willing to do, which is introduce a new race from as early as 2026, the existence of the legendary tracks being the primary expense that we have to talk about. Right now, there are already growing concerns for tracks like Spa, Monza, Suzuka or Zandvoort due to the fact that there are lots of other cities in the world that want to host street circuits for F1, which is a worrying trend that continues to grow within the roots of the sport. Right now, Rwanda is in advanced talks to have a race on the calendar as early as 2026, as Dominicali stated that the most important thing for him is that the country and the continent they go to should feel like a warm welcome for the sport and the fans, which is now the case for almost every country they do go to. Elaborating further, Dominicali said, "We want to go to Africa, but we need to have the right investment and strategic plan. Rwanda are serious contenders. They have presented a good plan, and actually we have a meeting with them at the end of September. It will be on a permanent track. With 24 races, I see that there is a number that will be stable, and we can really tune the ones that we are discussing to see what will be the future in the middle term. I don't see big changes coming in the short term, but in the next couple of months we need to discuss what will be 26, 27 and 28. We have different options, but we are in a good place." Apart from Rwanda, Formula One held extensive talks with Thailand, as Bangkok, the capital, is now open to redesigning the original layout of the circuit that was meant to be a street one, just so that it could please the wishes of the fans all over the world, as well as the drivers on the grid. But with Madrid, of course, arriving from 2026 onwards, and with Barcelona already under a huge threat, the question remains as to whether we'll be racing on 24 or 25 venues in 2026. So if there is another circuit that's to be added here, then we are very likely to see drivers like Alonso retire earlier, or drivers like Verstappen being pushed into another racing category, as they have shared their views on what they would do if the calendar continued to grow in this very unhealthy and probably not sustainable way. All of these changes are very interesting to talk about, that's for sure, and to be discussed in the F1 circles. But what is worth mentioning is that the sport should keep its own principles, and it should never abandon them for any amount of money or lucrative sponsorships. However, with how the last couple of years have gone down, it seems like maybe that ship has sailed a long time ago, and now we're watching how the sports organisers are trying to do anything in their power to attract more money and bigger revenue to the championship. This is hurting the wishes of the drivers to remain at their teams for a longer period of time, although it's increasing their salary and it's allowing the teams to have bigger financial help from new companies and investors in the sport, which I guess further proves our point that not everything circulates around the money factor in Formula One. With all this in mind, do you think that the new changes will add more quality to the sport? What do you think? Let us know in the comments below, and once you've done that, have a look at the video that's appearing on your screen right now.